In November of 1838, a Swedish military officer named Nils von Schultz arrived in Upper Canada believing he was going to help liberate Canadians from British rule. He was 31 years old, an experienced soldier, and he had been persuaded that people in the colony were ready to rise against the British. He was wrong. Von Schultz was part of the American-led Hunter movement, which was attempting to invade Upper Canada and support a rebellion against the British government. His force crossed into Canada near Prescott and took control of a stone windmill overlooking the St. Lawrence River. What followed became known as the Battle of the Windmill. For 5 days, von Schultz and the men with him were surrounded by British and Canadian forces. They were eventually forced to surrender, and von Schultz was taken prisoner and brought to Kingston. He was held at Fort Henry, where his situation quickly became clear. He was going to be executed. His court-martial began on November 26th, and one of the young men involved in his defense was a Kingston lawyer named John A. MacDonald. MacDonald was only 23 years old at the time. Von Schultz admitted that he had taken part in the invasion, but he explained that he had been deceived about the situation in Canada. He had believed that the population was suffering under British rule and would welcome the arrival of men willing to fight for their freedom. By the time he was sitting in a Kingston prison cell, he understood that he had been misled. He was sentenced to death. But the final days of Nils von Schultz were not filled with anger or bitterness. People who encountered him described him as calm, courteous, and deeply regretful about what had happened. He began writing letters and reflecting on the events that had brought him to Canada in the first place. The man who had arrived believing he was going to help free a population from British rule now understood that many of the stories he had been told were simply not true. The night before his execution, von Schultz wrote a final letter warning against more bloodshed. He had come to Canada believing that people were waiting for men like him to fight on their behalf. Now he was preparing to die because of that belief. On December 8, 1838, Nils von Schultz was taken to the gallows at Fort Henry. He was hanged that morning. He was one of 11 Hunter prisoners executed following the rebellion, but his fate was different from the others. Because of his military rank, von Schultz was buried at Fort Henry. His final resting place remained there, at the very fortress where he had spent his last days as a prisoner. During von Schultz's imprisonment, he spent time with the young John A. MacDonald, who had helped represent him during the court-martial. MacDonald was still decades away from becoming Canada's first Prime Minister, but he was there when von Schultz faced the consequences of an invasion that had been built on the belief that Canadians wanted to overthrow the British rule. Von Schultz came to Canada believing he was entering a revolution. Instead, he ended up imprisoned at Fort Henry, surrounded by the people he had come to fight. And on December 8, 1838, his life ended on the gallows.